Hello, everybody. A warm welcome back to the stage one of API Days Dubai and Middle East. This set of sessions in this segment will focus on the API ecosystem. Joining us first will be Vandana Verma, Chair of the Board of Director at OWASP Foundation. She'll be talking to us about the future of API security.
Hi, Prashant. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be joining here, and thanks for the warm welcome.
Yes, I
Yeah,
can see your screen also. So your
perfect.
video is loud and clear. It's over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today, I'm talking about API security. Now, when we talk about API security, it's one of the term which is sometimes underrated, sometimes needed a lot of attention, and that's why we are talking about it today. And APIs are something which we need every day, every minute, every second. So API security is majorly, if I have to put it in simple terms, it's the protection of the integrity of the APIs. Because you must be hearing that there is this API got breached, there's this data got lost. So it's important that we understand what we own, what we have. So if we don't know what APIs we're using, a lot of times, especially with organizations I've seen, they don't know what APIs are in use. And sometimes when those APIs are no longer needed, still they are lying over there. The access is still there. So we would be talking about that and what is the future of APIs. So let me talk a little bit about myself. I am currently working with a company named Sneak, and I also serve on open source boards. So OWASP is Open Web Application Security Project, where I'm serving as a chair, first Asian, Indian, and a women chair for OWASP. There we take care of application security, API security, and all of that. So you can join, become a member, and be part of it, and learn about software security. Now, if I talk about this image, this is like the futuristic image of something what we want, what we really like, and what we really envision. Now, the point comes is that what exactly this is all about. We want automation. We want everything to be on our fingertips. We want everything to be like getting it to us so soon. But with great power comes great responsibility. Now, this also tells us when we are dealing with all these latest devices, it brings us to the point we need to take care of the security for them. We need to take care of content around it. So, could be you have a device at home which is uploading some information somewhere so that it can be analyzed and could give you the better result. But there is a situation wherein there are patches which are vulnerable, there are software updates which are vulnerable, are downloaded, or there are APIs which are by mistake left open. There could be a configuration issue, could be anything else which is there, which is transferring data or exfiltrating data from your application, from the client's server, or from the client system or server to somewhere else, which we do not want. So what we really want is we don't want these monitorings to happen. Think of an IoT device. We are using it day in and day out. We're talking about smart AC, smart geyser, smart everything, or the whole smart ecosystem. So IoT makes it possible to connect our phones to fridge, to AC, to everything. And think of a situation wherein you've gone out. It's a summer. So if I'm in Bangalore, there's no summer here, like summer heat. But if I'm in Delhi or if I'm in Dubai or if I'm in any other place where actually it's summer and you want to come home with a cold house, but when you actually turn on the AC from your device, from your phone, but you reach home, it's super hot. Now you realize what has happened. So maybe your neighbor, somebody you know, has got into the device and has changed the settings. Or maybe an attacker has got into the system. It's so much possible. Think of those days where we used to hack or get into our neighbor's Wi-Fi, and still people do. Ideally, it's unethical, but people do. It's if the password is easy to crack. Now, the whole thing talks about we need to have security system, but how exactly that can happen? Now we are all part of DevOps teams. Whatever I say, I'm a security person, but I'm still part of the DevOps ecosystem, DevSecOps ecosystem. We're using microservices, we are using containers, we're using many latest technologies to bridge the gap between legacy servers to cloud native environments. So we have 1 foot in open source, 1 foot in legacy servers, 1 foot in cloud native environments. Especially during the pandemic, everybody was like, oh, we need to run the business, which was totally genuine. But then think of a situation when everyone was going online, everyone was shifting to cloud. There were certain things which were left open unintentionally most of the time. Now, attackers actually took advantage of it. So, when we talk about integrations, when we talk about interconnectivity, it becomes important that we understand what APIs we are using, what is the endpoint or interface that we are using, and why it is so important because businesses use these APIs which are well connected, well binded, and they're transferring the data from one place to another. To give you a perspective or an example, we are using one API just to check your bank account. But that API has given you such permission that you can actually check what all other people have in their bank accounts. You would be happy about it, especially if I get to know about that. I would be very happy. Yeah, even though I know I might not be able to do anything, but then think of a situation I know about who is how much. But from a security perspective, that's a big, big, big flaw. So broken, exposed, or probably breached APIs are behind these the major data breaches which have happened in the past. And if you are attending this talk because you take care of or you care about software security, and supply chain is again a big, big uh, uh, kind of a situation, a place which needs attention, and APIs are a big part of it. So apologies because I use or repeat a lot of words when I'm excited about something. So this is one topic which I really love talking about. Now, when I talk about developers as a malware distribution vehicle, have you ever thought of the situation? I, being a security person, have never thought of it. But the situations like this, wherein there are APIs, there are endpoints, there are third-party libraries which are becoming part of a breach. So in this particular case, event stream, which is in use since 2011, the package is being used by millions of users, and there are multiple downloads per week. When that's there, if somebody or a contributor sneaks in a small crypto miner in that, and everybody starts using their package, how crazy that would be. Think of the latest hack, which is like a few, not even a few years, just a year back attack, SolarWinds, where there was a library which was packaged as part of the whole package, shipped to everyone. Everybody started using that software. So that Orion software was so popular that people were using it. And that was a big buzz around it. But are these things new? No, they have been there for a very, very long time. And that's what these attacks talk about. So if you have an API which is connected to the third party application, we need to understand that that the information that is going to the third party app is exactly the same that we intend to. So with what it tells us that we need to manage those access rights, those authentication authorization mechanisms. So another important aspect is that why are we even talking about these small things, and especially authentication authorization? So web app API security is very much concerned about data transfer and data transfer through APIs. And if we don't have the right kind of authorization authentication, we're always in trouble. And that's how these OAuth, which is like which is an open standard for access delegation, is being in use for a very long time, and talks about we need to have proper check. And most APIs are implemented with either REST or SOAP APIs. And API, how exactly these are different, because the server is used more as a proxy. We are rendering components which are from the client side, not the server. And at the same time, it also says that we are consuming raw data most of the times when we talk about APIs. APIs expose a lot of implementation details because they are very well connected into the environment. So if we don't use the specific APIs for specific purpose or kill those APIs when not needed, we can be in trouble. And that it also tells us we are not in the monitoring cycle. So another important aspect comes is that we also need to take care of certain parameters which are set. I'll give you an example here. This is what we think that our app is. But do you think that this is our app? No. So this is exactly our app, wherein the dot is being written by us. Rest other is all open source. We connect with third party, we connect with open source, we have this, we have this, we have that. The whole blob is there. How exactly you can secure it? There are biggest breaches of all time which are happening. Think of Clubhouse hack. Clubhouse, I've been on Clubhouse, been chit chatting with a lot of people because it does not need to me be on camera and talk about or share my perspective. It's more like a community meetup that happens. So the leak behind that, LinkedIn. Think of this no X player breach. So all of these things are fine, but then there are certain recommendations that we need to take care of. Like we need to make sure that we are taking care of broken authentication level till authorization. Why do we say that and what exactly it is all about? Now, broken authentication is something where we are not having the right authorization at the endpoint level. And we have by this we are actually creating a bigger or wider surface level for access issues. Another important aspect is authentication. Who has access to what? um, I am not supposed to access the environment which is production environment. I'm a security person, but I still have access to that environment. Why so? I should not be having access. There was a time where one of a person from network team moved to security team. This person is supposed to manage firewalls. Now, this person is supposed to monitor firewalls. So that access needs to be changed. Similarly, for APIs, if an API is intend to do something, only do that, not the other function. We can create another API for that. So this person, we wanted some access to some app, and we were not getting. We raised the request; it was taking time. This person said, "Give me just 2 minutes." Open the firewall, did the changes, and said, "Oh, can you go ahead and check?" We were able to access. Now, this is a classic case of broken user authentication or authorization, where this person is not supposed to actually have access to it, but still have access to it. That access level has not been removed. So it's a combination of user authentication and authorization. Another interesting aspect is like excessive data exposure. Why do we need to have so much of exposure when we don't need it? And think of generic implementation. Developers tend to expose a lot of object properties without even considering that there are individual sensitivity. So if there's a particular API which has access to a lot of objects, which actually is needed, but at the same time, we can have separate APIs for it so that we can control the access separately. Let's actually try and attain that. A lot of times, my friends who keep sharing their stories, sometimes these stories become horror stories as well, because we have very limited time or very limited time and resources. So APIs do not impose any restrictions on the size or number of resources that actually or the client is requesting. But if we're not limiting that, what will happen? Could be a denial of service, could be distributed denial of service where multiple users are able to attack our ecosystem and bring it down. Then another important aspect is that function level issues. So we have issues with policies, procedures, hierarchies, groups, roles. Those are very unclear a lot of times. So what generally happens is that, oh, you come into the system, you join, your ID is created, your roles are assigned, you move to another team, those roles carry on. Similarly, with APIs, more APIs come in. Sometimes we don't remove those roles. So function level authorization is very, very important, because by exploiting these issues, attackers can gain access to other resources or other users' resources. Like I said, if I get access to your account details, how cool would be that? I would love it. And Prashant was talking about it. Now he's a friend of mine, so I can go ahead and look at his account, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But it's unethical. But who knows how exactly if an API is giving the information. Another important aspect is that mass assignment. So binding client provided data to the data models that we have without proper properties filtering can be a big issue. because we just go ahead and start allowing list, or just having the allow list, and it becomes a big problem for us. So, API endpoints, reading the documentation, or providing additional object properties and request payloads can actually lead to these mass assignments. Misconfiguration is something which is big, which has been there as a biggest issue. As per one of the research by Ponemon Institute, even the latest one talks about that security misconfiguration has been a big challenge, where we tend to miss on sometimes cross origin resource sharing, which actually I can read the other resources from other applications. And on top of it, injections have been there when we were kids. We've grown up, our kids are going to grow up, injection are still going to grow. So injection flaws such as SQL injection, no SQL injection, but what it is. So when an application take input from the user without validating, process it, send it to the database, and database just uses it or process it and give you the information back. Could be in the form of a command or could be in the form of a query. Like if I tell, oh, give me this data, give me these users, give me who has access to what, and it gives me. I would love it. I am total fan of remote code executions. I totally love that, wherein I can execute my code on some other website. So that'll be totally amazing. But then think of a situation when API has that issue and that can give me all the data. That'll be so amazing. And another important aspect is that asset management. Now, asset management is not just an API problem, but the worldwide problem, or especially the IT problem, wherein we tend to miss out on asset management or improper asset management. Sometimes we don't even know those assets exist in our ecosystem. Those API exist because the person who was working on it left and the API is not in use, but it's still lying over there and we're not monitoring. And on top of it, it also is one of the part for insufficient logging and monitoring, because insufficient monitoring and logging are coupled with missing or ineffective integration with incident response. We're not managing all the incidents which are coming up. Now, there are sayings, learn from others' mistake. So a lot of times we don't learn from others' mistakes. What happened? We just keep on going with that. And what happens? These biggest issues come into picture, from SQL injection to path manipulation to a lot of SaaS application issues which are there. So this API security checklist, what we can do, we can apply multi-factor authentication or an authentication method, which is second factor, so that it can validate, encrypt our data whenever needed, be it REST, be it transit, be it motion. We need to have right authorization for access. And my favorite, just in time access. Now, what is that? You need the access, get the access, be done with it, close. That's it. That's one of the amazing things. So that you don't have to worry about who's going to have access, what, when I do need to remove. No. Just in time access, whenever needed, it's going to push and then it's going to come back. It's going to be done with that. So generally, I try shook hack, but here I'm going to just calm down and ask for any questions that you have, or I will just keep on going. So now I'll go ahead and wait here and ask for any questions you have before I showcase a small demo. Any questions for me?
Yes. So one is business logic attacks. I didn't see that in that API top 10. What should be done to address that? I mean, prevent that business logic attacks.
See, business logic attacks are more common tested manually, right? And attackers are trying to exploit them. But what we can do is, if we have the right authorization and authentication coupled with
Mhm.
multi-factor authentication, probably we can avoid these business logic issues. Because business logic issues, in my perspective, lead to a lot of denial of service attacks. Because
Mhm.
sometimes these sound simple, but then they actually couple together and become big issues. So I
Right.
did not want to keep it separate, but they become part of broken object level access and
Okay.
user authentication or API authentication.
Sure. Okay. And I mean, we do keep seeing the news about in this company getting hacked, that company getting hacked, millions of data stolen, everything, right? So
Mhm.
yes, at high level, these are all some things which could have been prevented by having a good API security mechanism. That's one. Yes, but
Right.
if you look from an industry perspective, are there any specific industries who are prone to attacks or who are more negligent in terms of securing the data? Rather, that way I would put more negligent, or many of the names when you hear those organizations are the ones which with a quarter billion or a half a billion of IT budget also, and then
Hmm.
uh, they leak millions of
Yeah.
data just like that. So
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Yeah.
so, are there any specific industries who are negligent in terms of keep securing the data, or it's just a common factor everywhere? I mean, or is there somebody? I mean, like maybe I'm sure bank also is not the one safest we use can say, but still, are there any industries who are the most other than the API security industry itself?
I wouldn't comment on that. I'll be honest, because whatever I see, the moment you said, like, every other day we see the companies getting hacked, and there are companies which are sometimes not able to report also. So
Right.
now think of a situation that there is no particular industry which is
Mhm.
left behind and getting breached. Now,
Right.
if I have to put it from a perspective wherein what can we do or what is lacking is the education, the awareness. Because
Mhm.
if we all know these things are there, see, hacks are inevitable, whatever we say. The moment you're on internet, your application is on internet, you're breached already. Think from that perspective.
Right.
Now, what we can do is we can actually circumvent that situation. We can only safeguard ourselves. Now,
Right.
there are some who are able to safeguard. There are some whose data is getting leaked. And I know the biggest breaches of all time where their data was getting leaked for a few months and they didn't even know about it because there was no proper mechanism for monitoring. The monitoring
Right.
tools were there, but they were not fine tuned. So there's
Right.
no particular business unit which is left behind. So here would you say whichever unit that you have not seen is all safe, but still the education awareness that what are the things that can impact us is important. And
Mhm.
there are certain threat intels that comes specifically for certain industries because there are threat groups which keep targeting certain industries. So
Right.
probably we can get that threat intel, get it feeded and monitor our ecosystem. I think that
Mhm.
can help, but I wouldn't
Right.
say that, oh, this industry is better, that industry, trust me, no. I would say that this is a fine. So recently, I would name the company. Their CISO said, "Oh, we are the best of security."
Mhm.
Exactly 2 days after, their company was breached. After a week again, so it was like it was continuously the data was getting breached.
Right. Right.
So no one is secure.
Got it.
Be
Good
be
nominee.
the top of companies. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay. So you wanted to share run some video? Something
Oh,
you were
it's
saying?
just a small. Sometimes what happens is like my system crashes or the demo gods don't shower their blessings, so I keep a video on. So this is just a small API that or the endpoint or a dependency that I wanted to showcase. So this API or sorry, this endpoint is nothing but a rec query I'm using via Express.js framework. So this is not the problem with rec query. This is the problem with the validation that we have. So what happens is that when we don't validate what kind of input from we would be getting from the users. So we'll say, oh, we'll be getting just this object, that's it. Or we'll be getting this from the user. So if let's say I am supposed to only accept string, but suddenly user change it to an array, and that becomes a issue. The vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, where an application takes input from the user, doesn't validate, doesn't even output encoding, and then prints it back to the user. That itself says that there are lack of proper checks which are missed. So similarly, this is the case wherein all the validations are there, even index of greater than less than, all the checks are there, but still here if you see from string, if I convert it to array, so let me go ahead straight into the demo. Ready. So if you see right now, I am using it as a string, this particular parameter. This is the injection vector, or this is a cross-site scripting vector. Now if so sanitization function is there, everything which it's supposed to be having. But then now in front of name, I would change it to an array, and it'll start exploiting, it'll start executing. Why? Because validation was not proper at that particular place. So if you see, oh, I just said localhost 3001, but think of a situation where I'll say hacked by me. I have done it in the past, wherein I actually showcase those things. So I would say validation is one important aspect which is always needed at any given point of time. Um,
Mhm.
and it is important that we respect that, we understand that, and we start working towards having the right validations.
Right. Okay.
All
Sure.
right.
That. So I'm sure the audience enjoyed and will enjoy the recording also. Learn a lot from your session. It was great having you here at API Days, Dubai and Middle East. Looking forward to more participation from you at API Days events. Thank
Thank
you,
you
Vandana.
so much. And I'm so sorry for the background because everyone is just working remotely, so you can hear the background and yeah. But
Yes,
thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here.
yes. Thank you. So, joining us next is Baljit Malhotra, founder and CEO of Tej Lab, talking to us about monitoring the API ecosystem at global scale.
Hi, Prashant. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. I can see your screen. Stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Prashant. And thanks, everyone, for joining this session. Hopefully, you can see my screen. So, just a quick intro about myself. Uh, I've been into the security space for the last 10 years or so. In the last 5 years or so, my focus has been on API risk management. Before that, I was part of Black Duck team um, as a VP of research, looking after applying data science, data mining technologies for open source risk management. Before that, I was with SAP, again, looking at some of the risk management related usage coming from open source usage. So, plenty of my time has been spent working with great colleagues, looking at some of the applications of data science, data mining technologies for risk management related problems. My focus today is about APIs, and here is what I want to say about APIs to motivate our audience. If you look at the growth of APIs, you can very much see the journey they are taking compared to web sites. So web services, I'm talking about APIs that are available as a service over the internet. I'm not talking about APIs that are available local as a process. So if you look at the growth that APIs are taking, we are already talking about APIs taking the digital world in a big way. 83% of the internet traffic today is through these web APIs. Just before myself, the other talk was talking about how the security uh, threat is evolving as the ecosystem of APIs are growing. Now, here is another interesting perspective to look at the growth of these APIs. On the very left hand side, I have shown, rather on the right hand side, I have shown the comparison of a growth of APIs with the growth of open source projects or libraries. And we know that open source has changed the software industry for better in a big way. Almost it has become a de facto industry standard. Any solution you pick, there is an open source. APIs, in many ways, are replacing that. They are the new open source. And if you look at the graph on the left hand side, you will see how these different big vendors are actually coming up with different services, uh, exposed through these different APIs. And we will see these trends continue to grow in the next decade or so. We are already tracking hundreds and thousands of APIs, but these numbers will grow to millions and perhaps billions in the future. And if you are comparing the graphs, the growth at which these APIs are having is actually exceeding the growth at which the open source received. Now, I want to give you a enterprise view as well. So we talked about growth of APIs at a global scale and what some of those implications could be for various cybersecurity programs. But let's take a look at how these API ecosystem within enterprise could be interacting with different ecosystems and hence affecting our security posturing or compliance posturing and other related areas. If you look at the bottom, APIs are already interacting with our digital ecosystems. We as a company, here we are showing a system which is essentially enabling us to track these APIs at a global scale. We are looking at networks, we are looking at open source libraries or ecosystems where we can find these APIs to look for different trends and patterns. If you move up in the chain, we are also looking at different stakeholders that are part of this ecosystem that help us track this large growing ecosystem. Here is a real snapshot of a global ecosystem of APIs at a given point in time. And each dot here represents an API or a vendor that is hosting a service in that particular region. So as you can imagine, these are services. Vendors could be in one country and the services could be another country for various reasons, cost-cutting reasons, DevSecOps reasons, or other aspects of compliance and whatnot. But the point is, there are a lot of issues because of the way these APIs may be spread across different geographies, which could have impact on your data sovereignty, the way these APIs are interacting. You could have performance issues and other aspects. So why we are interested in tracking this at the global scale? So the very important aspect about understanding this ecosystem is to see what kind of issues we see across different industries, the kind of APIs that are available as APIs become open APIs, not at standards, but I'm talking about APIs that are publicly available for free. As more and more innovations take place, a lot of these services are being exposed through APIs. So governance is a very important issue for enterprises. And if you look at the very first bar that I'm showing, providing a comprehensive API governance inside and outside your organization is important. And of course, it starts with your organization and having the ability for us to look at these APIs at a global scale that allows us to make certain recommendations from a governance point of view. And also, the visibility is a huge issue or a gap with a lot of these enterprises. And what do I mean by visibility is a lot of APIs get into your ecosystem without actually you realizing when and how they made as part of your ecosystem. And one of the reason is the open source usage itself. A developer may download a library from GitHub for one particular technical reasons or business functionality, whatever that may be. But those APIs may have certain API integrations, even a single sign-on API. So many ways these APIs could get as part of your ecosystem without even you realizing it. On top of that, you may buy or acquire assets as you go through these M&A processes to expand your business. So discovery is also very important. So tracking these different APIs from various industries, vendors, allows us to have that kind of visibility through various API discovery mechanism. The other important aspect is we wish to see what kind of operational or legal or security aspects we could see companies managing when they adopt third-party services. Now, obviously, many times you may not have built these services. You may simply depend on them. But as your products and services or your digital footprint starts to depend on these third services, there are all kinds of legal issues, security issues. In many cases, I gave the example of an open API, which could be free, but free does not necessarily mean that you don't have obligations, just like the usage of open source software. And therefore, having the ability for us to track these different issues at a global scale allows us to make certain recommendations to specific industries, specific organizations, and whatnot. And also, very importantly, as we understand, APIs are a very important part of digital ecosystem. So, and companies have invested heavily into this ecosystem, and leveraging upon those investment is very important. So how these ecosystems are interacting with each other. So cost is always a big factor. So we could see this at a global scale, how these ecosystems, what kind of digital strategies, what kind of terms of services or SLAs could be impacting these ecosystems is also very important in the context of your investment. And last but not the least, when APIs are being adopted as products, companies are building APIs, companies are consuming APIs built by others. Managing their entire life cycle is very important, and each stage is very important. So this ability for us to look at all these issues from a global perspective allows us to provide that kind of life cycle management capabilities. So to sum this up, as the invisibility grows because of the usage across your enterprise products and services, you may be dealing with thousands of APIs within just your enterprise. I've seen in several cases a single product having thousands of API integrations. And from a usability point of view, you may have different teams consuming these APIs across different business units. So that is also very important. From a discovery point of view, knowing what exactly you need to do, what you need to do, how to deal with these vendors. For example, if there are different teams within a single organization that need to use same API, which could be a common across different digital services, do you deal with 10 different accounts? So usability is a huge issue. And scalability, as I mentioned, is no matter what you do, you have to deal with sooner or later. If you're dealing with one API, 10 API, 100 API, that's another story. But if you're dealing with hundreds of different products and thousands of different API integrations across those products, how do you manage your security? How do you automate some of the tests? How do you deal with certain compliance objectives you may have to meet some of the standards or best practices that could be part of your roadmap? So how we are enabling this? What does this global API knowledge base consist of? So I'm going to give some examples. So one of the important aspects that we are doing currently as part of our global tracking system is track APIs across various businesses or industries, whatever you want to call it. And you as an enterprise and as an organization, you may see these APIs differently as well. But categorization across different dimensions, cataloging them is very, very important. And that's exactly what we are trying to do. Tracking AI, data science, specific APIs, tracking APIs that are focused on certain business technologies, APIs that are dealing with cryptocurrencies and whatnot. It's just a mind-boggling space. Also tracking APIs across different geographies. We see a lot of activities in North America on East Coast and West Coast, and some in the middle, and some activity on Western Europe side, and some in Australia, India, and very few in China and Russia. So that allows us to see how these innovations are shaping up across different geographies. Now, mind you, many of these APIs could be behind the firewall that we couldn't see. And of course, as we are tracking hundreds and thousands, and this number goes into millions, this would be interesting to see how different countries are contributing to different innovations when it comes to providing these kind of services through APIs. Apart from tracking the categories and vendors, looking at a holistic view on different aspects. Either these are different versions, where they are hosted, what are the different API documentation pages, what are the legal agreements associated with those, are some of the important pieces of information as part of the API global knowledge base that we have put in place. Search is very important element as part of your um, enterprise API portal or whatever capabilities you may have. Search is going to be very, very important aspect. As within an enterprise, these numbers grow into hundreds and thousands, searching APIs will become very, very difficult. Forget about the global scale. So having the ability to provide these capabilities where you have contextual search. I'm not just talking about a simple keyword search, but I'm talking about a search with certain context. And also looking at vendor related information that I've already mentioned, but looking at for a specific vendor, what kind of services they're providing. If you talk about weather API, then there are hundreds of different weather APIs by different vendors. So looking at from a vendor's perspective, what services are there could be very, very important part of the piece that you needed. Some of these pieces of information are important from operational point of view, in the sense that when you're doing these API integrations, you want to know not only just these static pieces of information, but more dynamic, what data is being transacted by these APIs. So having the ability for you to look into sample responses is going to be key. Last but not the least, you also need, especially when it comes to the third-party APIs, you also need certain ways to see the security posture of those APIs. Now, you may not be able to do a SQL injection test against an API. So here, or maybe at least with your own internal APIs, you can perform some of these tests. So having the ability to run some of these test cases and have the security information, either on the strength of authentication, authorization problems, having this information is going to be very, very crucial to protect your digital assets. So in conclusion, you need ways to discover your APIs across enterprise products and services. And us having the ability to track these APIs at a global scale allows us to see what kind of coverages you need, what kind of costs you want to save and put in place to manage your digital assets, how you can reduce those risks that comes from the usage of those APIs, especially third-party APIs, and achieve your compliance objectives. At the end of the day, you want to build trust with your API ecosystem. You're not building APIs for yourself. You're building APIs for your partners, customers, and in some cases, or majority of cases, you may have a pricing strategy, or you may have a monetization strategy in mind. So having the ability to build a trust by tracking these different analytics, having the automation and continuous monitoring in place will enable us these different components. So with that note, this is my contact information. Prashant, I am ready for any questions that you may have, or if there are any questions from the audience, I can take those questions as well. Thank you.
Sure, Baljit. Yes. So, while your presentation, spoke about the need for API monitoring, and it clearly conveys that you have a perfect solution and offering for that. And there is a need in the enterprises, but it may not be known, or they may or may not have realized it. So, how much is that awareness that is there in in the concerned set of stakeholders about a need to have it or that urgency to have it?
I would say there is a mixed bag of things. Depends on the maturity of organizations. We have spoken to at least 100 or so very different range of organizations, and their preparedness and the ability to track even their own enterprise API ecosystem. Unfortunately, the state of art is they don't know all their APIs, and
Mhm.
having a gateway in place, having a portal in place does not solve your entire sets of problem I'm talking about.
Right.
As I mentioned, discovery is a huge problem, and that leads to all kinds of security issues, compliance issues. In particular, a lot of APIs are becoming, publicly available free APIs, and developers by nature are creative. They're adding those APIs to reduce their DevOps cycle, but this is causing other kinds of problems. So, to answer your question, I would say majority of the organizations are not fully prepared to have that kind of monitoring, continuous monitoring in place.
Mhm.
Um, their gateways do not solve all their problems. They do solve some problems, but not all. Portals are one way to consolidate some of those issues. But again, APIs can get into your ecosystem from open source usage simply because
Right.
a developer downloaded a library and it fell apart your entire program. So yes,
Correct.
and companies are wakening up to that challenge, and we as a community member are trying to help on some of those fronts.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Great to know that, Baljit. So that's all. There are no more questions. So it was a pleasure to have you here at API Days, Dubai and Middle East.
Thank you so much,
Looking forward,
Prashant.
looking forward to working together in the future.
Thank you so much. Guys, have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Bye.
Bye. The last session, or rather the keynote session, closing keynote session of the day 2 of API Days, Dubai and Middle East. The topic is digital transformation, potential pitfalls, protection, and privacy enhancing techniques. Joining us to talk about all these are Sonal Ratan, co-founder and CTO at X8, and Dr. Frederick Purcell, developer advocate at X8.
Hi, thanks, Prashant. Thanks for having us. We're absolutely thrilled to be here.
Yeah, great. Yes. So you both are visible, audio, video is fine, and your screen slides I can see. Okay, stage is yours.
All right, thank you so much. So again, thank you, Dubai, and thanks for the best of the Middle East to come and join us today and listen to us about digital transformation, the potential pitfalls, protection, and privacy enhancing techniques. And between Fred and I, we'll be covering some of the content throughout the rest of the talk. So who are we? Why should you really listen to us? I think that's usually the first good place to start. I'm Sonal. I'm the co-founder and the CTO for X8. My background predominantly has been around software engineering and then leading teams of software engineers. Prior to setting up X8, I was leading some of the digital transformation initiatives for HSBC for their corporate and institutional bank, and came across so many different issues when it came to APIs, scaling applications at a global scale, and some of the nuances when you're working in banks as well. I know yesterday was focused more on that open banking side, and today is more about digital transformation. But hopefully you'll glean from some of our experiences collectively from myself and some of our other people in our organization and our thinking around what needs to happen to make this a little bit easier. So generally, our vision as a company is to be the global and standard and for the secure and trusted exchange of data. So what does that mean? As an industry, we recognize that we need to be faster and we need to make it easier to find and consume data. And we've seen a huge rise in APIs off the back of that. But some of the challenges have been around being able to reuse APIs. So one of the pitfalls that we were seeing in my journey at HSBC is we ended up creating multiple objects for customer objects because we not only had, we had one department that needed it for one thing, we needed another application that needed it for another thing. There are certain restrictions on what we can do on mobiles with that information. So what we ended up doing is building all of these hundreds of services that were like a variant of the same thing. But what we want to do is we don't want to keep rebuilding these things. So how do we actually start using some of these data protection techniques and how we use privacy to actually even reduce some of that? But the main gist of it is that, it needs to be fast. It definitely needs to be easy, and it needs to be centralized. So if you are doing large scale programs around the APIs, we're going to talk you through some of the things that we've actually been through. And one of the big parts of it is what were some of the things that we wished we did better? What could we have, what did we wish we had done, and what we had forethought? And then how we can use privacy and protection to actually help us, not only from a business perspective, but actually meet those regulations as well. So we know that API security is going to be a key focus area for most organizations. Just listening to the previous talk, we recognize that this is just getting more and more notice. We're seeing more and more of it becoming its own segment, but there are some of the pitfalls that also go with it. So we'll just talk about a few of them. That we know that unmanaged and unsecure APIs are going to create vulnerabilities that are going to exceed multi-million dollars of security incidents, and we're already starting to see these. And we're going to talk through some of those examples as we go through the rest of this talk. By 2025, less than 50% of enterprise APIs will be managed, which means 50% is not managed. The fact that it's not managed and the amount of breaches that we're seeing that are coming from APIs, it's probably worth thinking about these things as a forefront as opposed to an afterthought, because when it's usually an afterthought, somebody's going to lose their job. But looking at some of the regulations that are in the Middle East, actually some of the consequences are not just losing your job. There's some jail time associated with it as well. So, it's really something that it's just worth considering to start with, to having those good design architectural patterns into your gateways, into your APIs from the outset. And like we said, API security is its own segment, but there was a talk at one of the Apidays events where Mehdi said, data API security is its own segment, but privacy will be the differentiator. And that's some of the things that we're going to talk about. But why is privacy going to be a differentiator? Why do you care about privacy? How can we make it easier? Because nobody wants to learn all of this stuff over and over again and have every one of your developers trained up on this. So how do we actually think of more smarter ways of being able to do this? So like gleaning from what some of these pitfalls that we've been talking about is, where APIs have been that solution for digital transformation, it's allowing us to consume data in ways that we've never been able to do before, or it's just been really quite painful to do so. But from the solution, it's also becoming the problem. So why is it becoming the problem? So data in motion, Gartner now is saying that APIs are the most frequent attack vector. So if that's where your attacks are coming in from, it's clearly we need to be doing something about this, considering 91% of organizations have had some sort of security incident when it's involving APIs. Just, again, it's worth just appreciating that this isn't going to happen to your neighbor. Most people this is happening to most organizations today. So where the gateways are helping you, to reiterate the previous talk, where they will help you, they're not going to completely solve some of your challenges around managing what data is going on where, because breaches are not just necessarily to do. And we're going to talk about some examples about why certain things are not just about someone attacking your API and just getting all the information. It's what are you using the information for as well. Just to appreciate what are the main drivers for these like data privacy regulations, and why are we actually looking about it. First and foremost, it's regulatory risk. So we do have 80% of the countries in the world are going to be having some sort of degree of data protection regulation. So that's 2/3 of the world's population is going to be by 2025 or 2023, they will be covered under some sort of data protection regulation. So irrespective of where you are, this is definitely something that should be on everyone's radar. There is that digital risk. We know that COVID has accelerated the pace of change. We've had to work differently. We've had to go at a pace that we've never had to go before, and it's literally going in dog years at the moment. But that does mean that certain controls might be lacked. To get things out as fast as possible, you do a risk-based approach on it and decide what can go for now and take it from there. But it's really, really important to understand that 87% of individuals said they will not do business with a company that they don't trust their security practices. So you don't want to be that company that is out in the press to say, yes, we've exposed data. I think that, especially for some of those conservative organizations, you want to start thinking about these things from the outset, thinking about these architecturally from design patterns perspective. How do we actually get to a position where we're in a place that we don't end up being in that, where that 87% is moving away from other organizations and coming to you. So think of it almost like a competitive advantage. The interesting stat that we also found is that 94% of companies are now providing privacy metrics to their board. So this isn't just about cyber risks anymore. It's not just about DDoS attacks and all of those things. This is privacy metrics. This is what is actually happening from your customers' data's perspective. So it's just this is going to board level. There's very to have your API programs not actually to be able to provide those metrics in a good manner. It's worth thinking about the good hygiene standards that you might want to get in there from the outset. So let's look at the local region and some of the regulations that are coming into force or already in force. So we've spoken to some people in the UAE as well. Some of our clients are in the banking space. And so we've been going through a lot of the regulations and trying to learn a little bit more about what they're actually doing. So we've got the CPR, and we know that there's almost like the general data protection type of regulation as well, the data protection regulation, which are following some of those exact same principles that you're seeing in the West with GDPR and CP. Sorry, I've completely lost what the acronym is. Fred, what is the acronym for the regulation in the States?
Just PII.
When we're looking at PII data, the regulations in the state where it's looking at it from a state-by-state perspective, we also are seeing generally in the States, looking at the West, they're now trying to consolidate the region, just like the EU have done, and creating that general regulation. But we can see that Saudi Arabia's got their version of it, Turkey, Bahrain, and Qatar. So just thinking about some of the main participants that are in the audiences today, we'll just cover a few of the main key points for these different regulations. So looking at UAE, we know that it's a multi-layered system. There's general things that that from a consumer perspective, that you need a customer's consent before you share data to a third party. You can't market to them without their knowledge and consent. All of those good things that come with a good data protection regulation. And there are some more nuanced and stronger regulations around regulated industry, especially around healthcare and for banking. Saudi Arabia as well, it's got some serious fines in there. One of the one that struck me was for cross-border data transfers. For any violation on sending data outside of your jurisdiction, what are the fines associated with it? So the fine is maximum 1 million riyals, but it's potentially accompanied with 1 year in prison. So they're not messing around with this. This is very, very serious for organizations where they don't want their data being sent out, and the consequences of getting it wrong are quite severe. So it's again ensuring that those good design patterns are in place. Just quickly to whiz through, because Fred's got some much more interesting things to talk about than I have right now. Turkey's got its variant with some of these, like right of erasure, anonymization, and we're going to talk. So Fred's going to talk about anonymization in a little while. And what does anonymization actually mean? It's quite important. The amount of people that we speak to that think encryption is anonymization, is probably just worth just clarifying that in case the audience don't know, because there are so many people that we come across in our day jobs that they use them interchangeably. And then finally, Bahrain, same sort of thing. Again, more of the same. All of them roughly have the same thing that's associated with it. Marketing, looking at rights of a data subject, how you're using data, what are you using it for. It is generally the same things, good practices, and you could get a good framework in place that follows all of those, especially if you're marketing to the whole region. So just a couple of stats before we move on. So I like this. Data protection is the law. There are legal consequences for getting it incorrectly. So we just like to talk about Wycart, which is a small company that's in like a small to medium-sized company in the States. They got a breach. They had a breach, and it was for 1.2 million. It was just more interesting to hear what the attorney that was prosecuting, what he had to say. He was just saying that this settlement should send a clear message to companies that skimp on data security as a cost-saving measure. It's not a cost-saving measure. It's actually the law. You have to do it. So it's just worth, again, just absorbing that part of it. It's just quite a powerful statement. So we really like the way that it's described. It is the law, but it's not just about breaches. It's what you're using the data for. So this is a really fascinating thing that I find it fascinating. Most of you might be completely over these sort of things, but Twitter was fined $150 million for using mobile phone numbers to market to their clients, but they collected it for multi-factor authentication. So they collected information under the premise that we need it to multi-factor authentication. We'll send you a text message and then we'll let you into the system. Somebody found that telephone number and said, oh, wouldn't it be great to market to them? We're a marketing company. We advertise. That's what we do. Why don't we actually use those numbers for it? And you can see that completely happening in any organization. You find data and say, oh, I could use that. But using that could potentially be a $150 million penalty because you're misrepresenting why you're collecting the data and what you're going to use it for. And you're not, before you're marketing to them, you're not consented for that. But they may have consented for marketing, but they didn't consent for you to use their mobile phone. They didn't say you could be targeted them in that particular way. So it's more about, what are you using the data for? What did you collect it for? And then being able to marry that up. And doing that is not as simple as it sounds. And finally, a little bit about us. No one in the history of Everness has said this is easy. No one has ever said that it's not going to be a challenge. It's not, but securing data is hard. Doing all of these role-based access, attribute-based access, customer-based access, all of these things are hard. And what we're trying to do is make it easy. In a nutshell, what we do as a company is we're a software platform that enforces data protection between APIs, applications, and databases in its most simplistic form, like Ronseal on the tin. This is what we do as a company. That is it. But we call it smart data privacy for a reason, because we're trying to find smarter ways of being able to do that. And then I'm going to hand over to Dr. Fred in a minute, that is much, much smarter than I am, and that is going to tell you why we see this as smart data privacy. And if you want to see and try out our APIs, you please go ahead and go to developer.x8.co and try out our APIs. With that, I'm going to hand over to you, Fred.
Thank you very much for that big intro. I hope I was able to live up to that today. So a little bit about my background. I'm a solutions owner at X8, where, as someone mentioned, we're working on some of the most challenging problems of data privacy. My academic background has been around big data analysis. So I really understand how important it is to have the right data and have as much data as you can get to get those insights. And we see this in industry as well. We see digital innovation increasing, and with that, the demand for access to data is also increasing. So there are a couple of key questions we have to ask ourselves around this, and key questions that we've asked ourselves when we've sort of gone back to first principles and thought through this in the context of API, which is sort of, do you know who's actually accessing your data? And are you creating different interfaces for each of these people? So are you creating duplicates and different variations of all kinds of patterns to service these different needs? And how does that then allow you to make your API program scalable without scaling your risk at the same factor of growth as you're scaling your APIs? Because we all want to see lots of APIs. And in our previous speaker, we saw those lovely graphs of how API use is scaling so brilliantly. But what we want to do is we want to prevent risk scaling alongside that. We then also want to ensure that our API consumers are compliant with data regulations. And as Sonal's so nicely laid out just there, that varies where you are, where you're sharing. And if you're a company who's operating in a multinational domain, this can become really quite hard and really quite complex and become quite messy quite quickly. So if we jump to the next slide. So what we want to do here is just have a little bit of a jump back to first principles and think about how we set up our APIs, and are there actually ways we can do this better by thinking about the way we do our privacy potentially slightly differently. So this sort of our V1 API, you have our API producer, we have a consumer, and we have a gateway in the middle, and it's happy days. People are getting the data, we have control, we have oversight, and everything is flowing very smoothly. We then jump forward to our next step where it's running so smoothly, people want more data. People want more data, we have more consumers, we have requests for different types of data. So we now have balance and accounts and all these different kind of products that are there. The issue now becomes that we need different variations of what is essentially the same API for our different consumers. So we end up building accounts EU and accounts Luxembourg, depending on who wants to consume this data. And this is all still running through our gateway. And this very quickly starts becoming an absolute nightmare in terms of scaling. When we want to build this out, we are then starting to very quickly hit a point where we will lose control and will not be able to manage this properly. So we then take the next step to sort of what we would consider V3, or the mesh, which has obviously got great excitement and fundamentally solves a lot of these problems that we have around that gateway model, where we have this discovery channel. We no longer need to manually map our consumers to map proxies. We no longer need to manually do any routing. And we have common service definitions. So the discovery service can route all our users to our correct services. And this is absolutely fantastic and really solves a lot of these key problems. But the thing that we've discovered with this model as a real limitation is that we now lose the visibility, we lose the oversight. And as Sonal laid out there, it's so important for us to know where things are going and who's using it and for what reason they're using it. Whereas now we have this mapping in the discovery service that is being done on a large extent automatically, which is obviously how it's solving the problems, but that as us as the people who are wanting to manage the service becomes a real problem. So what we've done here at X8 is we've really taken a step back and we want to think about this again from first principles. So what do we do if we have an API producer and a consumer and we have a gateway? Well, what we can do is we can think about actually taking data privacy and governance and compliance out of this and simplifying this whole process. So we wrap this governance step around the gateway, and then we don't really have to worry about it within our APIs anymore. So when we start scaling this to the next level, and we add more consumers and we add more products. Can we go to the next slide, Sonal? Thank you. Yeah, so we start scaling this. We then are able to have common product definitions, and we are able to still inject this governance at the gateway layer, and we are now able to abstract the governance away from the APIs themselves. So we no longer have 4 variations of accounts and 6 variations of customers, depending on where they're going to and who they're going to. We no longer have customer marketing and customer security, which is obviously what Twitter clearly needs, because security information was in an API that was being accessed by people in marketing. We no longer have to build this out and have this issue, because all this governance and compliance is built into the gateway. So where do we go with this? How do we think about this as a whole approach, as a holistic approach, really? So what we've sort of built out is this fast model here. So what we want to do is we want to locate and classify our API traffic, which is obviously the first step. We need to know what's going on, and then we need to analyze that traffic. So we need to learn about the data in it, we need to understand what data is in it, and we need to understand the risk associated with that. So back to the Twitter example, we need to understand that the phone number's there, what it is, and what the risk associated with sharing that in the wrong context is. In Twitter's context, obviously a very, very hefty fine. We then need to solve that risk. So we need to do something about it. So depending on where that data is going, we need to do different things about it. This solve is something that I'm particularly interested in. What can we do with this data? Because the way we solve it is also very important in allowing us still to get as much information out of the data as possible, which obviously is what we're all here about. We want to learn from our data, use our data, and utilize it as best possible. And then we need to test. This is not a one and done sort of approach. It's a continual approach that we need to iterate through. So we're able to continually monitor, analyze, solve, and test APIs and make sure that we're complying with the newest governance, internal or external regulations, and we're able to hit that mark every single time and automate this process. So we're not doing this in a manual way, which then allows us to scale our APIs without scaling our risk associated with those APIs. So as Sonal mentioned earlier, we see a lot of misconception about anonymization. So how do we reach compliance? So how do we remove data that shouldn't be there? And the simple answer is, well, we just anonymize it. But what does that really mean? And anonymization at its core is just the data doesn't relate to an individual, and the data protection is not reversible. So if we think about a very small data set here, for example, where we have a name, date of birth, gender, and a town of someone, we could do something like mask the name. And then you could say, well, this is no longer directly associated to an individual. But we can actually have to be very careful about this. And this approach has bitten quite a lot of companies, where we can use this non-direct information, combine it together, and then actually identify that individual. So if you think about a scenario here, for example, where this individual could be potentially very old in a very small town, and then it can be actually quite an arbitrary exercise to use other information sources, such as voter registries or anything like that, to then identify that individual based on their gender, their age, and their location, simple factors like that. And there's some stats around the percentage of Americans who can be identified by their date of birth, gender, and location. It's around 84% of people in the US can be uniquely identified by those three characteristics. So we really need to think about what data is associated with that as well. So then we can say, okay, right, well, let's just mask everything out, get rid of everything. Fantastic, we're anonymized. That's no longer reversible, and it's no longer related to an individual. Now, the downside of this, as I sort of alluded to slightly earlier with our solve, is it's no longer useful. You've just gotten rid of all your data. So we're trying to walk this fine tightrope between meeting our obligations in terms of hitting compliance, making sure we're meeting all those regulations, but also making sure that we can use our data, because obviously we can't just get rid of everything and make sure we're really compliant that way. And then just down below, we've just got encryption, which again, as Sonal pointed out, is something that we see people use a lot interchangeably with the word anonymization. And yes, I can't see that information there. I can't see who that relates to, but there will be a key that will reverse that and will reveal that information. And that in a lot of contexts is still considered a reversible technique, and therefore is not considered anonymization. So now that we understand a bit more what we're talking about when we say anonymization, we can jump to the next part, which is analyzing the data. Fantastic. We now know we need to do something with it. We need to protect it, but what do we protect and where is it? And this is something that we see as needing to be fundamentally an automatic process. We can't have manual mappings forever going through all new APIs, all new OAS specs that you produce to say, okay, this is a phone number, this is a first name, this is someone's home address. We need this to happen automatically. And this is where we see some of the new machine learning approaches being incredibly powerful tools really to do this. But all good and well, being able to identify in that sort of example sandbox there, sorry, I'm still on the previous slide, being able to identify in that example of that API response from a sandbox that we have, name, but we also need to understand the context. So where's that data? Where's it going? And do we need to understand where within an API it is as well, and how it's being shared, and those different regulation requirements. Another way of thinking about this as well, another signal we can look at for privacy is how's the API being used? Can we look at the request metadata? How often is this API endpoint being hit? Who's requesting it? Where are they requesting it? What time they're requesting it from? Can we use all this information to build this holistic approach to identify where the sensitive information is that we can then act on it? So on the next slide, we can see we're now stepping to solve. And this is now, what are we going to do about this? What do we need to do about this to be able to meet our regulatory requirements? So we have a lot of different techniques that are out there that have been developed in academia to make sure that we remove the data. But what we're really interested in Xate here as well is, what can we actually do to help you see as much of the data as you can while we meet those privacy requirements? So on the right, you can see some basic ideas. So we might not need to mask a whole email address. You might be able to get rid of the username and keep the domain name and gain some insights about where that user may be in the world, what type of internet service they're using. And that might, in a particular case, not break regulatory requirements. And that might also differ per user. And this is where this whole system needs to come into the gateway, is the fact that if I am a tester, I might not need to see the email address. But if I am in compliance department within a company, I might need to see the email address. So we can think about these techniques being applied differently for different people to make sure everyone gets the right information at the right time. We can then also just simply remove information if it's not needed, or also look at ideas like, 37 might be someone's age. We might be able to turn that into an age range. So marketing maybe don't need to see everyone's individual age, but it might be useful to see what sort of 10-year age range they're in. And then we can actually look at using all the other information around that to ensure it's private. One of the other techniques I just quickly want to touch on is a very exciting one that we see great interest in, which is adding noise to systems as well. Can we actually change the data, make it private, prove it's private, but actually have real numbers associated with it, so the end user doesn't necessarily know it's not the original data? That's probably something more in the future that people are interested in, but just showing those possibilities that we get there and this balance that we're going to build between privacy and utility within data sets. So jump to the next slide. Well, that's me done, isn't it? So yeah, sorry, just to round up there, happily on a flow there. There are lots of cool ideas we can work on here, and there's lots of progress we can make in this industry to ensure that APIs are done in a sensible way, scale sensibly, and deliver as much utility with as much privacy as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Red. And then just some final thoughts from myself. We're quite excited as a company to see what's actually happening in gateways and how they're looking to do more and more in gateways to enable this data in motion, because we are consuming data in a different way. It's not just about the REST principles. Obviously, most people are now starting in their API programs at some degree looking at GraphQL, but there are the other types, that the event-based systems, the streaming services that are also now getting fronted with this. So it is really interesting. We're very, very excited about what gRPC is going to bring to the table. It is going to mean that another part of what our business also looks at is just data flowing through JDBC connections. We are going to be looking at how that evolves over the course of the next 5 years, and how gRPC could potentially just be a different way on how we're looking to do that. Message queues, Kafka, Rabbit, all of these things are now getting fronted by the gateways, which means that we can proxy them and we can start putting that governance layer there. So it's just a very exciting space. We're really keen to see how we can help with some of those compliance issues around it. I won't go into my last slide. I will leave it there because Prashant's here. That's my cue to say, be quiet now.
So in during your section, I think you alluded to privacy going to be a differentiator in the API security. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a big part of some of the content that we created, one is we definitely know that these data protection regulations are focused around individuals, around customers, but there are other requirements that you're going to need. There are other sensitive things that we want to consider. When we're looking at API security, it is just looking at protecting the main pipes and the mechanism of how information is traveling. We're not looking at the data that's actually going through it. By being able to do things like see if you're allowed to use data for marketing, see if that individual is given consent, check that you're allowed that data is allowed to go cross jurisdiction. these are the things that you won't get from your typical API security vendors. They're looking at protecting you holistically, but where privacy is going to come into it is taking some of that burden away from your developers. Like, we've all been there. We've had teams of graduates come in, etc. They won't necessarily understand all of these nuances, but we can put a governance structure in place at our gateways and in our API security side of it that can actually help you reduce and minimize that risk. It just takes one individual to just slightly get it wrong. But this means that it is that privacy risk that we're worried about just as much as actually not our APIs not working and being DDoS attacked, all of those sort of things. So they should be going hand in hand. And we want to centralize how we're actually doing that.
Right. Okay. And I think, Fred, to you, Fred, is there a way to quantify the privacy or the risk? That risk to the data.
So that's sort of along the lines of what someone was saying there as well. Is that whole approach of actually being able to measure some of these things and give you quantitative numbers back to tell you how private your data is or how much risk is associated with that. So even if you're sharing it in a very secure API, it's actually understanding what's in that message and then being able to associate information around that on how useful that information is and also how private it is.
Okay. Great. Great to know. I mean, great to know about a lot of things, including the privacy enhancing techniques that you shared here. It was a pleasure to have you here, play the role of a host to you at API Days Dubai and Middle East. I hope you also enjoyed presenting to this audience.
Yep, I hope everyone found it interesting. Thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings to an end API Days Dubai and Middle East sessions. Joining us right now will be Naushad. You're on mute, Naushad. You're on mute.
Yeah. Good to see you smile in your face and successful journey of 2 days event.
Yes. So what do you feel? What are those three top takeaways that you would consider from the day 2?
Day 2, see, I think we have learned how the governance, which is taking up the API journey to simplify their journey, where we started the airlines, which is very predominant in this after this COVID pandemic, how they are trying to come out from the retailing, merchandising, and ancillary revenue kind of thing. What is the takeaways to the airlines, which and another team has given, how the airports are handled while during the pandemic situations, and now I think the security, which is the privacy security, which is now hacking even OWAS, how the industry is taking up that OWAS security, how the transformation is required, what required to change their secure enterprise kind of systems. I think this is good in a way where the learnings is very impressive.
Yes, I was about to use the word phenomenal in terms of the learnings. Yesterday it was more from a functional perspective on what is being done, what could be done, what are the best things or what things to be avoid, everything from most, and that too more from an open banking or open finance perspective. But today focus more on the digital transformation, that cultural change or the cultural readiness that need to be there in the organizations to take that journey. And there were sessions on the digital leadership, and we deep dived further into the API security and obviously the data privacy and security. So these were the quite interesting topics, and that too quite relevant in this market, which is growing, innovating and growing at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure, Naushad, you are also as excited as me in looking forward to the next year, where we will be having a physical event at Dubai. Definitely, would like to extend our gratitude to all those sponsors who made sure that we held this event in a free for the audience manner. We would like to thank our gold sponsor, Google Cloud, silver sponsors, DataStax and Gravity.io, bronze sponsors, Apida and Postman.
Yeah.
And definitely the 1,000 plus of audience who registered and joined us in our journey, 2 days of journey yesterday and today, and are and quite a lot of them are new to the API Days community, because we came to this region only with this event actually, right? So it's always a pleasure to go into new regions and add to this growing community. So looking forward to meeting you all in person next year at Dubai with API Days Dubai and Middle East 2023.
Yeah, excited to see you on 23 in-person event, very closer to Dubai.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dubai
Thank you
and
very
Middle
much.
East.
Thank you, Prashant. Yeah.